Hi, everyone. My name is Reid Sheftall, and I'm making a presentation today about the question of whether there was voter fraud in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. This is my quick resume of the things that I've done that kind of relate to what I'm going to talk about today, which is a little bit mathematical. So a friend of mine asked me to do this. The first time I made this video, I didn't say anything about myself. And he said, oh no, you gotta tell people who you are, what sort of bona fides you have for this sort of analysis. So there it is. I also made a picture representation of everything, which is a little bit more interesting. So let me go over this real quick. I went to MIT, majored in physics, scored 1580 on the SAT, got 99th percentile in the American Board of Surgery in training exam 1 year, got 99th percentile on everything else, the GRE, the national boards, the MCAT, it's called, the test you take to go to medical school. I have lived in Cambodia for a number of years, where I started a charity called Operation Kids. I've directed one feature film, which I wrote. I've acted in 5 or 6. I wrote a treatment for a BBC production of a medical show called Casualty. I've written a few books, played on the pro golf tour for 15 years. I was a horrible pro golfer, but I did manage to win a couple tournaments on smaller tours. I didn't win them on the Asian Development Tour, but I did play on it. Let's see what else. So finally, I came to my senses and went back to being an amateur and played in one of the USGA events there. Like I say, I'm a surgeon, so what I do almost all the time is surgery. And here we're fixing a heart on a young girl that's part of Operation Kids. And here's a picture of, not the same patient, but another patient about the age of the girl that we fixed the heart on. And that's me a few years ago, a lot of years ago. I knew I shouldn't have dyed my hair gray. Okay, well, let me continue on now and talk about a very interesting analysis that was done by Dr. Shiva Ayadurai, and we'll refer to him as Dr. A from now on. Benny Smith, who's a really interesting guy. You'll learn if you watch this video, and I highly recommend that you do, that Benny did not go to college, and he's doing this high-level data science. He must be a brilliant guy. Very interesting to see something like that. I always admire people like that. And Phil Evans, who compiled a lot of the data here for the analysis that they did. Now, let me back it up one thing. I want to explain what the X and Y axes are on this. This has been very popular in the news and on the internet, but I think I found a problem with it. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit, and that's why I didn't really want to use this in my analysis of whether or not there was voter fraud. So I'm going to explain what they did here, and it's really very interesting. I'm just not sure that it says what they claim that it says, if you know what I mean. What they did was they plotted, like on any Cartesian coordinate system, you know, there's a y-axis and an x-axis, and the x value is the percent of people who voted Republican among the people who voted straight party, okay, voted a straight party ticket, like all Republican or all Democrat. The y-axis is a little bit more complicated. It's the percent of people who voted for individual candidates, in other words, not a straight party ticket, who voted Republican, minus the X value. And it'll become crystal clear when I give you some examples, okay? So let me just take this example right here that they gave. It's a good example. Let's say you've got a precinct that has 2,000 voters, 1,000 of them vote straight party, okay? And 450 of that 1,000 voted Republican. So the X value is going to be 45%, okay? That's the percent of straight party voters who voted Republican. So that's why he's pointing at this precinct right here, and that's why this drops down to 45%, okay? The people who voted for individual candidates, only 250 voted for Trump in this example. So the Y value is going to be 25% minus the X value. And remember, the X value was 45%. So the Y value is negative 20%. And that's why this maps to negative 20% here on the Y-axis and 45% on the X-axis. Okay, we're going to go over a couple more examples, and that'll be crystal clear by the time you see a few more examples. But again, I highly recommend you watch the video. I learned a lot from that video. I didn't know that. Well, one thing I'll talk about later just shocked me. I almost fell out of my chair when I read it. So let me continue on, and you'll hear about that other thing in just a bit. So here's another example. I'll just go over it real fast. You got 200 voters in a precinct. 100 of them vote straight party. 60 of those 100 voted Republican. So the X value is going to be 60%. You've got 100 voters who voted for individual candidates. 65 of those voted Republican. So that's going to be the value, the Y value is going to be 65 minus 60 equals 5. So that plotted point would be 60, 5 for the X and Y values. Now, these are some numbers from an actual county. And as you can see, the points go down and to the right, okay? Which means the greater the, that means among the people who voted straight party, the more percentage of them were Republican, the fewer the Y value was, okay? And remember what the Y value is, I'll tell you in just a second. But their premise is that, or their assumption is that these blue points, these precincts, should go straight across, okay? If something strange is not being done to them. In other words, they're kind of making a case that there was election fraud where some of Trump's votes were given to Biden. Because they think that all these blue dots should go straight across. And instead they go down and to the right. In other words, something funny is going on here. And in this particular example in Kent County, these are the actual points. And they think that 22,500 votes were taken from Trump and given to Biden for a 45,000 vote difference. In other words, they calculated how much would have had to been taken from every one of these Trump values in all these precincts to bring the points up to just the zero line, not even up to above it where this seems to be going, but just up to the zero line, the red arrow there. And they came up with 45,000 net in favor of Biden. So let's plug in some numbers to see if it makes sense. Let's say you have a precinct of 10,000 voters and 100 vote straight ticket. Let's say that 75 of those 100 vote Republican. So Dr. A is going to put 75% on the X-axis. The Y-axis is the percent of non-straight ticket voters who vote for Trump minus, like I said, the X value, the percent of straight ticket voters who voted Republican. So you're going to have 9,900 non-straight ticket voters because only 100 voted straight ticket out of 10,000. Let's say that 51% voted for Trump and 49% voted for Biden. So Dr. A would assign 51, right? That's the percent of non-straight ticket voters who voted Republican, 51 minus the X value, which is 75, or negative 24 for the Y-axis. And he would conclude that 24% of the votes were switched from Trump to Biden in order for that to happen, okay? Now, it doesn't seem right to me right offhand. So let's make it even more extreme to understand it, or to get an example where we can understand it and it can derive a contradiction. If it does, we use this technique in physics all the time when I studied physics. We would take an extreme example and derive a contradiction with our initial assumption. And if we did, we knew our initial assumption was wrong. Okay, so let's take a small, tiny precinct to see what's going on here. We're going to take a precinct of only 10 voters. We're going to have 5 votes straight ticket and 5 non-straight ticket. And we're going to have 5 votes for Trump and 5 votes for Biden. Okay, so let's see what happens when we do that. Let's say of the 5 straight ticket voters, 4 voted Republican and 1 voted Democrat. So Dr. A will assign an X value of 80% there because it's the percentage of straight ticket voters who voted Republican. That's 4/5 is 80%. Of the 5 non-straight party voters, pretend that 4 voted Democrat and 1 voted Republican. So the Y value is going to be 20%, 1/5, right? One of the 5 voted Republican, 1/5 minus the X value, which is 80%, which will give negative 60% for the Y value. So then this is going to be a point that goes way over to the right on the X-axis and way down on the Y-axis, okay? So the point would be 80, negative 60. And Dr. A would conclude that 60% or 6 of the 10 votes were switched. Probably 3 votes, 3 Trump votes were given to Biden. So he gained 3 and Trump lost 3. In a precinct where equal numbers of people voted for each candidate, 5 and 5, and the same number voted straight ticket and individual candidate. And we've got Dr. A concluding that 60% of the votes were switched from Trump to Biden, okay? So that bothers me, okay? Because think about it. It could just be that it could be personal preference, right? I mean, it could be that those Republican voters, remember there were 5 of them, 4 of them voted straight party ticket. It could be that those particular Republican voters in this tiny precinct just wanted to vote straight party ticket and no votes were switched. You see, I mean, we've got a precinct with equal numbers voted Republican and Democrat, equal numbers voted straight ticket and non-straight ticket. And we've got this analysis concluding that votes were moved from one person to the other. Now that bothers me. It's a very extreme example, but it doesn't fit the premise. So I just kind of rejected the analysis. Now I could be wrong, but it just doesn't seem to make sense to me when I took this extreme example. And it has to work for all examples. Any kind of conclusion like that has to work for all comers or it's no good. Okay. Now, I'm going to do some analysis of my own, but I won't use that. At first, when I read that and watched the video, I said, well, that's pretty good. And then I started to think about it and it didn't seem to make sense to me. So let me go over some things that I concluded on my own here, or that I discovered on my own. So I used to be a card counter too. And one interesting way to look at this is to divide the voters into 2 groups because they're very easy to separate. There's walk-in voters that came in on November 3rd, and there's early voting. Early voting could be mail-in voting. It could be people throwing their ballot into a box. There were boxes placed everywhere. And let me tell you a little bit about how analogous this is to counting cards and so forth, because it's just a great analogy. It really explains what happened here very well. When you open a new deck of cards, all the suits are lined up together. You get diamonds, clubs, hearts, and spades in the box. And so when they get splayed out like this, when the dealer splays them out, you can quickly check to make sure all the cards are there, for example. And this is very similar to walk-in voting because when you vote as a walk-in, you go to your precinct, you vote on a machine, and then you go home. And people tend to live around other people who think similarly to them. Not always. It could be 50-50, but usually it's about 80-20, 70-30, 90-10, ratios like that. And if you took a random group of, say, 15 cards out of this setup here, you know, you might get 8 black and 7 red, but there's going to be in some precincts, and you certainly would. But in others, you're going to get 13 blacks and 2 reds, or maybe 12 blacks and 3 reds in any group of 15, okay? So that's very, very similar to walk-in voting by precinct, okay? And like I said, the reason for that is people that live near each other tend to have fairly similar political leanings, not always, but in general, that's true. That's why these people stay in office so long. In Jacksonville, where I'm from, we have one district that's very Republican and one district that's very Democrat. And the lady that was the congresswoman from the Democrat district was there for many, many years in a row. Again, because people tend to live near other people that have similar leanings. And the Republican candidate, generally, congressman, generally stays in office until he decides to retire. So that's what happens with walk-in voting. Even big big areas like districts even, let alone precincts. Precincts are tiny. All right. Early voting is completely different because the effect of early voting is that all the ballots get shuffled many times, at least 5 times they get completely shuffled. And here's how. When you've got people mailing their ballots in, they're being taken from your house or where you drop them in a mailbox or wherever it could be to the postal office, and then they're collected there and taken to the counting depot where the county board of elections seat is. They don't go to the precincts, and they don't get divided again when they get to the county. They get thrown into a big pile. And so you've got ballots coming in from very Democratic districts and Republican districts the same day that are in the same batch. And that's just one way that they're shuffled. Another way that they're shuffled is people throw them into boxes everywhere, and the boxes get picked up. And just think about it for a second. If a lady in Beverly Hills that votes Democrat goes to Orange County to go to a mall to buy something, and she happens to remember that there's a ballot drop box in Orange County, she might drop her vote into a ballot box in Orange County where it's mostly Republican. Or maybe there's a 20-year-old young lady who goes to USC from Orange County, and USC's in South Central Los Angeles, and which is a very Democratic area. And maybe she's from a family in Orange County that tends to vote Republican. So that's another way that the votes get all mixed up. Okay. And there's about 5 ways that they get shuffled. So what happens is when votes get shuffled, after you've shuffled them a few times, instead of them being red 15 times or 13 times in a row and then black 13 times, or maybe 7 and 8, if you cut exactly in the right place, but you get clumps of Democrat and Republican votes when it's walk-in, because people go to their precinct, they vote, and then the machine gets taken downtown and the votes get pulled off. But if you're mailing your votes and they're all getting shuffled up, it's sort of going to go red, black, maybe black, black, red, red, or red, 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 black. Okay. But for the most part, if you take any random group of, let's say, 24 votes, and the ratio is 13 to 11, every time you grab a group of 24 votes, it's going to be pretty close to 13 to 11, no matter where you grab that 24 votes, if they've been shuffled enough. Okay. This will become real clear in just a second. So again, you've got Orange County, which is very polarized, maybe 80-20 Republicans and Democrat. You've got South Central, which is the opposite. It's 80 Democrat, 20 Republican, maybe, or maybe it's 95-5. I mean, I don't know. In both of those places, it could be. But the point is, it's very polarized. And for early voters, it's not that way at all. Everything's getting shuffled. Okay. So again, so what? Well, it's very important because you've got 2 distinct groups of votes. The early voters get shuffled a lot. So their ratio is maintained. Whatever that ratio is, it's maintained over hundreds of thousands of votes in that county. Whereas the people who vote on November 3rd, the walk-in voters, that ratio is not maintained at all. It might be, the first 10 votes might be 9-1 for Biden. And then the next 100 votes might be 72-28 for Trump. I mean, it jumps all over the place. Okay. All right. Now that should be starting to become a little clear for you. And I'm going to give you a graph in a second to show you. There you have it. Now this is it for demonstration purposes. I'm not going to even tell you what state it was. I'm not going to tell you whether it's Trump on this side or Biden or vice versa over here. I just want to give you the idea that the early voters are going to be in a very straight line here. And if you remember from junior high school, y equals mx plus b is the equation for a straight line. Forget about b, that's the y-intercept. That's the y value when x equals 0. So forget about that. But just look, m is the slope. And as you can see here, it's very constant. The slope is very constant. And the slope is the Trump to Biden or the Biden to Trump, whatever it is. I'm not making that clarification yet because I don't want to. I don't want you to get lost in the weeds. Just the point is that you can easily separate the early voters from the walk-in voters who are all over the place, as you can see. If this axis is Biden here and this is Trump, this is a precinct that votes heavily Democratic because you have to go way out on the x-axis to get to the point, but you only have to go up a little bit on the y-axis to get to the point. You see, this is these are logarithmic scales, so don't let that scare you. But you'd have to go out to more than 10,000 votes here to get to this point, but you only have to go up a little over 100. Okay, 10 squared is 100. You have to go a little over 100, but you have to go out to 10,000 here. So boy, this is a really polarized point. You with me? Okay. But all these others are in a straight line. And of course, the slope's about 1 because these votes are pretty close, right? They're always 51%, 49, 50 and a half, 49 and a half, things like that. So the slope is almost 1. So if you go out to say 100 here and you go straight up, you hit 100 here, okay? So the slope's about 1. And again, I'm not even labeling the axes or telling you what state is in. Stay tuned. Now, this is a real state. This is Florida. And instead of letting this be Biden and this be Trump or vice versa, I've decided, I shouldn't say that. I want to make that very important clarification right now. This data I took this off of Twitter. A very smart person plotted all of this. And I really appreciate the person wanted to stay anonymous, so I can't even thank him, but he took these data points from the New York Times database. So something that's very important, which I'll just talk about now briefly, is when you've got people with different agendas presenting evidence in favor of the claim that there was fraud that went on and against the claim that there was fraud that went on, you've got to be very careful to make sure that for example, Trump is making the claim that there was fraud. Okay, so we're going to look at the data and see if there's some evidence that there was. So I don't want to get any information really from right-wing sites. I feel much more comfortable getting the information from left-wing sites because there's a smaller chance that they would have fudged something just to prove their point. So I felt really comfortable when I found out that this raw data was taken from the New York Times, which is a left-leaning newspaper, okay? So anyway, here we go. And again, thank you very much to the anonymous person that compiled all this. So like I said before, the walk-in people are all over the place. This is the reporting time, which is going to be very important in just a second. But the y-axis is the Democrat to Republican ratio. So here's 1. If they had the same number of votes, that ratio would be 1, right? D over R would be 1. So when it's less than 1 down here, that means R is bigger. So these are Trump votes down here. These are places where Trump dominated. These are either precincts or batch amounts. They didn't really ever say it, so I can't say for sure. But anyway, it's a group of votes from somewhere that are above 1, above this line, meaning they're more for Biden than Trump, and below the line, they're more for Trump than Biden, because the ratio, D to R ratio, is less than 1, okay? So in this particular case, Trump won the walk-ins, okay? These are walk-ins because they're spread all over the place, like I've already explained. These are the early votes, okay? That's why they're in a straight line, you see, for D over R, right? We would expect that to be a straight horizontal line, constant. Because remember, we said the more of the shuffling that goes on, and let me tell you, there's a lot of shuffling in early voting, like I explained. The ratio would not change much, so it would be a constant. So on this thing, since the D over R value doesn't change, it's a horizontal line that doesn't change. Now, you may say, well, what's going on here? And I think I can explain that. There's a little bit of a drift downward there, okay? And I'm calling that the rural drift, because think about it. If you've got people way out in the country, in the rural areas, voting, their votes are going to get into counting central, right, for the county, slower than the votes that are cast closer to where county central is, which is usually in the inner city. Okay, so the mail carriers go out to the rural areas less often, and it's further to get back in. So everything gets delayed just a little bit until the pump is primed, if you will. And when the pump is primed, everything's horizontal. Okay, now, but look at this for a second. So out in the rural areas, it's mostly Republicans, right? So that's why the ratio is probably going to change a little bit until that pump is primed. It's going to get more and more Republican as those votes come in, right? So it starts off slightly biased to the Democratic side, the inner city side, where the postal carriers get the ballots in quicker. Okay, because remember, look at all these. Look at the dates on all this stuff. This is the day all the walk-ins happen. This is November 3rd here. This is 18 at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Okay, so people came in after work and voted there. Now, here's something really interesting. Trump won the walk-ins. This is, for the most part, it's below 1, okay? Once it gets steady state, it's below 1. So I think this explains why Trump won Florida fairly easily. He won the walk-ins and the early voters in Florida, okay? All right, let's look at some other examples. Here's Minnesota. Here's the rural drift in Minnesota. I'm not sure what it is right here because they're kind of jumbled together, but certainly there's a downward flow of the early voters there, and that's the rural drift. But after it gets settled, after all the rural guys have gotten in and everybody's into the depot where they collect all the votes for the county and start running them through the machines, you get this beautiful horizontal straight line. You see that? Absolutely beautiful. Perfect. And it's above 1, significantly above 1. That means Biden won the early voters here. You see that? Biden won these. Now, it's a tough call on the walk-ins because it looks like there's more dots down here, more points. But again, I'm not sure what's going on right here. I think probably that's the early voter rural drift, but some of that could be walk-ins. And when you count up every single dot here, it's not that far off. But it looks like Trump won the walk-ins there by a little bit. But Biden won the early voters by a fairly significant margin, and Biden won Minnesota, okay? Now this is Wisconsin. Wisco, okay, we used to call them Wisco when we rode a crew against them. All right, now look. Here's the Democrat to Republican ratio, and it looks like Trump won the walk-ins here in Wisconsin, doesn't it? It also looks like Trump was winning the early voters significantly here. Here's the ratio of 1. It looks like Trump is winning the early voters here, but what happened here? It jumped up. Now, remember, I've already explained that this ratio, when you shuffle the cards a lot, and you take any group of 24 votes, say, if the final ratio is going to be 13 to 11, it should be about 13 to 11 all the way through because the deck was shuffled a lot, okay? Now, something funny happened here where this ratio jumped up, okay? The ratio changed almost instantaneously there. Now, let's look down on this. Here's the 4th of November at 4 in the morning. Okay. This is 2 in the morning. Whoa, where's my, okay. This is 2 in the morning. This is midnight on the 4th. 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning. So if you go straight up from here, that's about when this funny thing happened. And I'll tell you something that's very interesting. I'm in Asia right now. I work over here. That's where my charity is. So I was just sitting in the afternoon watching TV, watching the results come in. And it was 4 in the afternoon for me. I was not asleep. So I was watching CNN and they cut to a commercial and Trump was way ahead. I can't remember by how much because he was so far ahead, I wasn't even paying that much attention to it. It might have been 60,000 votes, 80,000. Because remember, he won the walk-ins and they started counting the early votes and he was winning that too big time. So he was way ahead. When they came back from the commercial, he was behind. One commercial. So something a little odd happened there. It was noteworthy. And I'm thinking, what the heck happened there? You know? And the time on this graph compiled by our anonymous, brilliant guy on Twitter, he found it right when it happened. Okay. These are the New York Times points. Okay. We got a lot more to show you. That's just one state. Let's look at a few more. Very odd though, right? And Biden ended up winning Wisconsin. Okay. This is Pennsylvania. Again, I'm not getting every single blue dot in my green circle here, and I'm not getting them all up here either. Some of them, it looks like some of them right up on the edge, or some of the higher, way up here too. So I'm only giving you an approximation of who I think won the walk-ins, but it looks like Trump won this one too. Now, here are some funny things happen here. I don't know whether they started early counting here or they waited a little longer maybe to here to do it. But either way, these are all on Trump's side of the line. These are all with a larger R value than D, or they wouldn't be below 1. Okay, the ratio of 1. So these are Trump votes here. All of this is. But look at this thing. Wherever they started voting the early voters, it should have been a horizontal line. And look at this thing. It's going up. It's not, the ratio is not staying constant. Now, you might want to ask, how do they make the ratio not constant if they're cheating? And just think about it. If you've got a 13 to 11 in favor of Trump, and someone flips the program on a computer or physically does it, and they start adding votes to the Democratic side, that's going to change the ratio. And depending on the rate at which they add those votes, that's going to make the ratio move higher and higher and higher in favor of the Democrat. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that was done. I don't know anything about how anything was done. I'm not trying to make any claims there. I'm just saying that this looks awfully suspicious because these are the early votes here, and the ratio is not supposed to change. Okay, so I don't know. We're going to look at a few more states. Do you remember Minnesota? Let me just click back real fast to show you Minnesota. That is what it's supposed to look like based on multiple shuffling of the ballots. Okay, now, and Biden won this state. But anyway, that's what it's supposed to look like. You're supposed to have a straight line there. Okay, let me go back to Pennsylvania. So something, a little odd's happening there. And what's funny was, again, look at the times on this thing. This is midnight on the 4th. You know, the clock just clicked, but it's noon in Asia where I was, 12 hours away. So when did all this stuff start to happen? At about, here's noon on the East Coast of the US. Here's midnight. So just a few hours in here, 3 or 4 hours in, you know, out of 12, 1/3 of the distance, it's 4 a.m. And that's when this thing started happening here. And again, I was watching CNN and Trump was he was 800,000 votes ahead in Pennsylvania. And over one commercial, it seemed like it changed drastically. I can't remember the exact numbers. I wish I could. I wish I could go back and find a video of the actual feed from CNN and when that commercial happened and when they came back and it was totally different. Something really strange happened right there. Yeah, I'm losing my pointer here. Here it is. Something really strange happened here at 4 a.m., roughly, maybe 5 a.m. I don't know. It was somewhere in here. Okay. Here's Georgia. Boy, look at all these walk-ins are all over the place. Wow. Again, it kind of looks like Trump maybe barely won the walk-ins in Georgia. And wasn't Trump way ahead in Georgia for the longest time? But what's going on with all these things that are these early voters here? When they started counting them, it's supposed to be a straight line. And you know, these might not be early voters here, but that they might be because they're very much in a line compared to the rest of it. So this could be the rural drift. And then this after that, it should go dead horizontal after that. It should go just like that. But it didn't. It went up, and it didn't just go up in a straight line, kind of like Pennsylvania. Look at all these little step functions. Bang, bang, bang. Funny jog there. Bang, bang. So very strange. This is not what it's supposed to do at all. Here's Michigan. Again, God, look at all these walk-in votes are all over the place. Now, these are not done by time. These were reported by batch number for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but so we can't map this to a certain time when this happened. But let me just check Georgia too. Yeah, Georgia's by batch number. See, batch number, not time. So we don't know when this happened. But anyway, let me go back down to Michigan. So again, you know, what's going on here? This is the one, this is the horizontal ratio of 1 right there, kind of the 0 line, if you want to think about that. And Trump is just way, the early voters are way below that the whole time. And near the end, they start popping up and funny things are happening. Again, the walk-ins are very close, I would say, there in Michigan. But it's funny, I made a post on Facebook while I was watching the returns, because I knew all my friends in the States were asleep. And I said, you know, it looks like Trump is going to win Pennsylvania and Michigan, because he was 800,000 votes ahead in Pennsylvania almost. In Michigan, he was way ahead too. I mean, look at this. Here's the D equals R line right here at 1. So somewhere in here is when I made that post, if you want to look at it that way, because he was way ahead in Michigan. The post said, Trump's going to win Pennsylvania and Michigan, and he's going to lose Arizona and Nevada. I predicted. Wow, I was really wrong, wasn't I? But anyway, there you have it. He was way ahead in Michigan, and then things started creeping up, and that was the end of that. Okay. Here's Virginia. Virginia is the first one I noticed. I bet I can figure out where we are in time on this batch, because Virginia was literally a single commercial too. I mean, here's the D equals R line here. So Trump won the walk-ins by a mile. There's only a few walk-ins above the line here. Just a scattered one, but there's a ton of them down here. All right. And then here's the horizontal line, the early voters in Virginia. And somewhere in here, I was amazed that he was winning Virginia so easily, because I didn't really know that it was going to be that competitive. I thought Biden had Virginia because McLean and all these places are up near Washington, and you know, the Democrat usually wins Washington and surrounds. So although even in Hillary, I think, won Virginia, but it was reasonably close. But I didn't think it would be that close this year, because no one talked about it as being a swing state. But Trump was so far ahead early in Virginia that I'm thinking, wow, what is going on here? Trump's winning Pennsylvania by, you know, 750,000, and he's winning Virginia by a huge amount, and Michigan, yeah, Trump's going to win the whole thing by a huge amount. I'm thinking, gosh. But again, a commercial or two, and Virginia was reversed. It was amazing. Look at this. It's way up here now. And again, these step functions, pow, bang, 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 kaboom. So something's bang, bang. So it happened a lot in Virginia, whatever it was. We don't know yet. It looks awfully suspicious to me. All right, now, let me go back to counting cards for just a second. I'll try to go a little faster because I kind of beat that into the ground, but you get an idea that things aren't looking like they should. Let's say it that way. All right, now, let me first give you a super quick primer on blackjack. Blackjack is a game where you try to get as close to 21 as you can, including 21, without going over. And you place a wager before you bet, and you get cards, and the dealer gets cards and so forth. Okay. The dealer has to play by certain rules. And one of them is that she must hit on any total less than 17. But the player has the option to stand or hit at any time. Okay. So if you're counting the cards, you have an idea of what remains in the deck. And if there's a lot of 10 valued cards that remain in the deck, that's good for the player. If there's small numbers that remain in the deck, that's good for the dealer, okay? Because if she has a bustable hand like 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16, she has to hit according to the rules. So that if there's a lot of 10 valued cards left in the shoe, which is a collection of decks, I'll explain that in a second. Here's a picture of it right here. If there's a lot of small cards left in the shoe and she has a bustable hand, like say 14, she wants a bunch of small cards left because she's likely to just make her hand better without going over 21. But if there's a lot of 10 values in the deck, there's a good chance she's going to have to hit because she has less than 17 and she's going to bust and you're going to win your wager. Okay. 5 is the worst card for the player because a 5 will improve any bustable hand for the dealer, be it 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16. It'll even take a 12 and move it up to 17 where she can stand and hope that you bust. If she has 16 and gets a 5, she's got 21, which is a tremendously good hand. Happens all the time. If she has 15 and gets a 5, that's 20. So a 5 is a very bad card for the player. And like I say, even with an 8-deck shoe, which would mean there are 40 5s in the shoe, 40 of them, I would keep a side count of 5s with my feet and a side count of aces with my other foot. My right foot would be 5s, my left foot would be aces, because aces are the best card for the player. And that's because if you get a blackjack, it pays 1.5, and you can soft double. An ace can be counted as 1 or 11. There's a lot of reasons why aces are the best cards for the players. By the way, if people are interested in counting cards, I'll be happy to make a video about it. And it's pretty interesting. It's a lot easier than you think it is to count cards, and it works. You will win money if you do it properly, and they don't cheat. And I'll talk about that later. But it's work. You got to go to a casino every day and sit there and count the cards. You know, it's like going to a job, very high-paying job, but it's like a job. Okay. Now, this is something really important, which I'll just touch on quickly. Here's a shoe, and you know, if you go to Las Vegas, they put 8 decks in the shoe because the more they stop to shuffle, the less money goes into the casino coffers. So they like to put a lot of cards in the shoe, but they won't. Here's the thing: they won't deal all the way to the bottom of the shoe. They always put a plastic card in here about 20% of the way to the end, or 80% of the way to the end, with 20% of the cards left, which in an 8-deck shoe would be, let's see, well, it's not 25%. So it's a little bit less than 2 decks, okay? Now, 1.6 decks. So look, think about this for a second. Since I explained why 10s are good for the player, by the way, 10s are really good for the player also because there's a thing in blackjack called doubling down and soft doubling. Like if you have a total of 11, that's a horrible hand if you play it straight. But if you double down, well, I'm sorry, it's not a horrible hand if you play it straight, but you don't utilize the full potential of an 11. 11 is a good hand. If you get a 5 and 6, you'd like to double your money. And so what you do is you double your bet. If you put $100 out, you change it to $200 and you get one more card. So if there's a lot of 10 valued cards left in the deck, there's a bigger chance that you'll make money when you double down, okay? Golly, sorry about that little slip of the tongue there. It's a great hand. Okay. So that's another reason why the 10 valued cards are good. Okay, let me continue on now. Quickly, very quickly. Let's say you assign a value. This is actually how you do it. It's called the high-opt system. And I use the beat the dealer system where you do the ratio of non-10s to 10s, and that gets kind of crazy with 8 decks. So me and my friend switched to high-opt, which is you assign a value of 1 to 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you assign a value of -1 to 10, jack, queen, and king. And you just count all the cards as they're played. As the dealer, you got 8 people at the table maybe, and everybody's playing, and she's picking up cards when people bust. And you've got to count all the cards as they come out of her shoe, and she flips them over, and adjust the count as the other people are playing, and refer to tables, which I'll talk about in a second. But I don't want to get into too much detail with card counting, but there's a lot of stuff to memorize, but it's well within the grasp of anyone, I think, of maybe 80%, 90% of all people, I think, can do this. But anyway, this is how you count cards. And of course, you have to divide the raw count by or the running count by the number of decks that remain to get a true count. Because obviously, the more decks that remain, the more watered down that count would be. Okay, that's a little bit too much detail too. But the point is this: since they never let you go all the way down to the last card, you don't know if they're cheating or not. Okay? Because if you go all the way down to the last card, the count should be 0. And of course, when you practice, when you teach yourself how to count, you do take a deck of cards and flip them over and count real fast in your head. I can count faster than I can even flip the cards over. No problem. Okay. And every time I get to the end, it's 0. If it's not, I made a mistake. If I flip all the cards over and the count's +2, I made a mistake somewhere. Okay? But it never happens after you learn how to do it. It's so easy, it's ridiculous. All right. But if they put a plastic card in here, they don't tell you, you never get to the end, so you don't know if they did something funny or not. Now, let me give you an example. When you get to the red card, when the dealer's pulling the cards out of the shoe and she gets to the plastic card, and she's always acts startled when she does it, but when she gets to the plastic card, she finishes that hand and then she reshuffles everything again. Now, think about it. Half the time when she gets to that plastic card, the count should be favorable, and half the time it should be unfavorable. Okay? So if you're playing at a table and the count's coming up unfavorable every time, right? Then let's say that it comes up unfavorable 2 times in a row. That would be a 1/2 times 1/2 chance that would happen if she's not cheating, okay? 3 unfavorables in a row, the chance would be 1 in 8, because it'd be 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 equals 1/2 to the 3rd power, okay? So that would be a 1 in 8 chance that you'd get 3 unfavorable shoes in a row at the red card, at the buried card, at the whole card, if she's not cheating. So if it happens 5 times in a row, there's a 1 in 32 chance that would happen 5 times in a row if she's not cheating. Okay, and elections are an awful lot like this. I'm going to show you some things in a minute that are very, very unlikely that happened this year. And maybe they happened. It could entirely be possible that there was no funny business this year and just all these strange things happened. Okay, so just bear that in mind. This can also happen when people aren't cheating. I mean, it does happen when people aren't cheating. Okay, 2 to the 5th power is 32. 2 to the 6th power is 64. 2 to the 7th power is 128. So 1 out of 128 times, you're going to get 7 unfavorable shoes in a row. But only 1 out of 128 times. And I sit down at a table and 7 times in a row, I get an unfavorable shoe. Boy, that's bad luck, isn't it? Or maybe not. Let's see. There I go. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sit at a table and get 7 straight unfavorable counts at the whole card. There's a 1 in 128 chance. But that would only happen. There's a 1 in 128 chance that would happen if she's not cheating. Now, think about it for a second. You got a casino, and they've got 50 blackjack tables, or 200. I don't know. They got a lot of them, though. Wouldn't you think it would be interesting if you own that casino or managing it or something to take a few 10s out of the deck? Just take a few 10s out and see how much more money that table makes than another table? Because we know the 10s help the player and hurt the dealer. So the more 10s they can sneak out of that shoe, then the more money that table's going to make per unit time. And you just have to think they would have done that experiment and learned, oh my God, we double our take when we take 2 10s out or 3 10s. So it really makes you suspicious that they might do that sometimes, okay? Now, again, I don't want to get into too many details about card counting. And again, I'll be happy to make a video about it. But if you suspected that happened, let's say you sit down, you play 4 shoes, you're kind of breaking even, and all of them are unfavorable at the hole card. You might say, hey, can you, you're perfectly allowed anytime. It even has a sign there that says it. If you want new cards, just ask for them. But you don't want to go in there and say, could I have some new decks, please? Because the pit boss would go, that guy just asked for new decks. The man upstairs, please take his picture. I think he's counting cards. They're going to think you're counting cards if you're on top of it enough to ask for new cards. Okay, so we didn't ever do that. By the way, I did this first with a friend of mine who was a fellow physics major named Eric. And Eric was a brilliant guy. We were study partners too, and he much better at physics than me. But we would. Let me just tell you a little bit of the story. I was teaching physics at USC down in Los Angeles. Eric was working up near San Francisco in some technical thing. And he found the book, The Beat the Dealer, which was written by an MIT guy, Edward Thorpe. And he said, I got this book, We Can Beat Blackjack at the Casino. I said, well, golly, I'll get the book and read it, and then we'll meet a little bit before and practice. And then if we feel we can do it, I'll go to the casino with you. So Eric came down on his next vacation, and we dealt to each other until we were certain we could play perfectly, okay? And yes, the big pile of chips that the dealer started with eroded into the big pile that the player had, because these things really do work. So we flew to Reno. We couldn't, absolutely had to try it in a casino after doing all that. So we flew to Reno and played all night and flew back, and we had $900 each. So betting, we were so poor, betting $2 to $5, we made $900 in one night. So we knew we were onto something. I mean, we thought we were never going to have to work again. And we were right, really. But like I said before, it's work. Okay, so one of those books that I wrote that I showed you in the first slide has a whole chapter about me and Eric. Eric and I flying to Reno, learning the system and flying to Reno and trying it, and then all my other exploits through the years, card counting. Okay, so anyway, the difficulty of card counting is not in learning the system. Like I said, everybody watching this can learn how to count cards and learn how to do it very well, I think, if they really work at it. But you have to learn how to evade detection by the pit bosses and just by everybody walking around looking at you. I was 21 years old when I was teaching physics at USC. So I looked really young. I'm 64 now. I looked so young. Eric looked young. He had long hair, and and we're in there, betting all night money, and we were so young. And I think Eric showed up in a T-shirt that had the Maxwell's equations on it, which are the electromagnetic equations. I said, Eric, you can't wear a shirt like that in here. They're going to know you're counting cards. Anyway, he was so casual. He didn't even care, whether he won or not. But anyway, there you go. So it's getting away with it. It's learning how to tell if they're cheating. And, one time, I remember this distinctly, Eric and I were sitting at the same table and we were counting. And, we took a little break and I said, Eric, what was your count on the last shoe? He said, -12. And I said, me too. What's going on with these shoes? They're all bad. And I said, look, let's dump this table and go eat something and figure out what to do. So we went and ate and we talked about what the odds were that we kept coming up with these bad counts and how extreme the bad counts were and everything. So instead of doing something stupid like, asking for new cards, we just went to another table. And every time you sit at a table, you get 2 or 3 even bad shoes in a row, you just leave. And then finally we learned, hey, why even sit there and break even for an hour on a bad table? Let's just stand behind it and count the cards. And if it looks fair, if it's getting favorable, unfavorable, maybe 3 unfavorables in a row, then 2 favorables, then we'll play when we sit down and play. And then we got even smarter than that. I'm a little slow on the uptake. So we would sit there watching an 8-deck shoe until the count got red hot. Then I would sit down and clean up and get out of there. So we learned how to count the cards, not even waste time with the minimum bets until the shoe got red hot. Then I would sit down and bet the maximum bet the whole way through, because what they look for with a card counter is they're looking for someone who varies their bets a lot in kind of a systematic way. And you don't want to do that. So you're better off just, if you're going to bet from, say, $2 to $25, or maybe we're richer now, so maybe bet from $10 to $50, You're better off counting the shoe, standing around, talking to the waitresses, drinking something, and then when it gets red hot, sit down and bet $50 on every hand. That would be a better thing to do. All right, now let's get back to the election. I'm sorry about that. Thanks for listening to all that rigmarole about card counting. But here's something a little bit odd to me. Bellwether counties are listed on the left, and no matter what source you look for bellwether counties, you get a different group of counties. And so what I did was I just listed them all because I don't know. Again, I didn't know whether someone was trying to make a point by listing only certain bellwether counties. So I just found a bunch of different sources, Wikipedia and a few others. And I'm going to talk about all of them, but it's very unusual what happened this year. Here's a group of bellwether counties from one of my sources. And think about this. This is Valencia County, New Mexico. It's predicted the winner of the national election in every election since 1952. So that's 17 elections. 48, 68, yeah, 17 elections, okay? Since 1952, they're batting 1,000 until this year. And this year Trump won Valencia, New Mexico. Trump won Valencia, New Mexico, and Biden won the overall election. So they missed for the first time this year. Now, there's other counties here, and the reason they're bellwether counties is because they have an incredibly good record. So, you got 2 misses, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. All of them voted for Trump this year. So they all missed this year, except for Kent, Delaware, county of Kent in Delaware. But, Biden's from Delaware. So, or he lives there now. So I'm not surprised that Biden won Delaware, but golly, every one of these other superstars, if you will, had Trump as the winner in their county, but he lost the overall thing. Okay, so here's another group of bellwether counties. And this is neat because it actually gives the percentage of counties of this group that voted the same as the winner. And many years it's 100%. That's how good these bellwether counties are. Look at these: 100, 100, 94, 94, 100, 100, 100, 88, 82, 76, 100. Now look at this. Here's the worst one. And this is 1960. 1960 is when John Kennedy beat Nixon. So, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And I was a little kid then. I was 4 years old when the election occurred. So I heard about it 10 times during my lifetime. There was suspicion that, I think it was around Chicago, that there was some ballot stuffing going on. And I even remember vaguely that it was the mafia was involved in it or something. But, there was strong suspicion that there was cheating in 1960. And what do you get? You get the year that the bellwether counties were the worst at predicting the winner. All right. But anyway, this year, only 18% of the counties predicted that the Democrat would win or were consistent with the Democrat winning. Only 18% of the counties were won by Biden this year. And 82% were won by Trump. Isn't that strange? It'd be like if no reason for an analogy there. I was just going to say you could take the 5 smartest math students in your high school and they get every question right. And then finally a question comes along where all 5 of them miss it, but a few other people get it right. And you start to think maybe there was something wrong with that question. All right, well, here's another example. It's the same thing again and again. It's another group of bellwether counties. These are counties that have deviated from the winner in the Electoral College only one time. And this year, 10 of them. These are 10 counties who have only missed one time since 1980, and they missed this year. And in 2016, here's 4 that missed. So these are obviously 4 that aren't in the one last time, the last slide. But anyway, and 2016 was a very close election, wasn't it? I mean, that's when Trump beat Hillary. Certainly it was close. But here's something else interesting about this. 3 of these are in California. Oops. Yeah. 3 of these in 2016 are in California. Golly, so many funny things going on here. It really makes you wonder about some of these states. Okay. Now, these are just fun facts. Again, these are facts, but they're not indicative of what funny business went on, if it did. But let me just talk about this. And also, let me, again, number 4, we're not going to talk about, because I found this from something called Judicial Watch. And every time I get the source on these things, I look it up. And if it's right wing or something, I just take it out. I think Judicial Watch is right wing. You know, you look on there and it has some kind of measurement of whether it's right wing or not. And it was on the right wing side of the midline. So forget about it. Let's just look at 1, 2, and 3. And by the way, these you can verify anywhere. These aren't, I mean, this thing you can't verify. It says, you know, a million counties and something happened. Forget it. But these are actual verifiable things. The polls and the leadership of the Democratic Party predicted the Democrats would gain 15 to 20 House seats, and they actually lost 14. If they hang on to the 2 they are still leading in, they might lose more. But here's the good thing for the Democrats. They still retain the majority in the House by 1 with 219 representatives. Now, they had 235 before. So they were expecting their total after this year's election to be 250 to 255, and they only have 219. Again, there's 2 outstanding that they're leading in. The Republicans are leading in 11 of the outstanding 13, and the Democrats are leading in 2. So assuming they win those 2, they'll have 221 representatives instead of 250 or 255. So what that means is the country voted strongly Republican this year in a year where Trump lost, where the president lost. Now, that certainly happens sometimes, I would think. But again, it's just another thing that's very odd. For example, just like counting cards, getting all those shoes with an unfavorable count at the red card, it just makes you think. All right, The Economist, which it turns out is a fairly middle of the road magazine. With a name like that, I could have sworn it would be right wing, but I looked it up and no, there's a lot of liberalism in this magazine, as far as I could tell. Again, I don't have unlimited time, but I probably looked it up in 5 or 6 sources, and they all said it was middle of the road, no problem. All right. They said there was a less than 1 in 100 chance the Democrats would get 225 seats. So what are the odds that they would get 221? It's not linear. It's not 104. It's not 1 in 104. It's probably 1 in 1,000. Okay? Because it's 1 in 100 that they get as far down as 225. And then another one, maybe that doubles it to 1 in 200. And then another one, double, 1 in 600. You see what I mean? And then another one and another one. I mean, the odds get really low that you would be 4 less than a 1 in 100 chance. But that's The Economist, and that's what they predicted before it happened. So the fact that, and another thing, the Republicans didn't lose control of any state legislatures. So this was a very strongly Republican wave this year, and yet Trump lost after he was leading in all of those states with the strange graphs where the line that should be horizontal and constant is drifting up and step functioning all the way up. Very strange. Again, I'm not talking about the mechanism, how anything could have happened. I understand there's a lot of information, which I'm going to talk about on the last slide coming up soon. But this is just a matter of looking at a lot of things that happened and wondering what are the odds that many things would happen in 1 year when they do not happen in other years, like in the bellwether counties. Here's another thing that blew me away. There's a thing called a single race ballot. And what that means is it's a ballot with all the competitions on it, but they only fill in the ovals in one of the races, the presidential race. So in Georgia, evidently, and I looked this up in so many sources. Oh my God, some of them said 96,000, some of them said 95,000, a couple of them said 95,801. In 95,801 ballots, only the presidential race was considered, and Biden got the vote 95,801 times. Okay? On the Republican side, only 818 people voted for Trump in no other race. That's a ratio of more than 100 to 1. So of all the single race ballots that came in Georgia, Biden got more than 99% of them. Isn't that amazing? What a ratio. Remember, if the thing ended up being 52% to 48 or 51 to 49, I don't know what it is. These kind of things should be very close, right? I mean, it should be really close how many single race ballots each candidate got. Very strange, huh? More than 101 ratio. Biden got more than 99% of them. All right. So the way to see if there's something funny going on there is to look at other states and see if the same thing happened in other states. So we looked at Wyoming, picked one that we knew was Republican, not a swing state. So we just looked at that, and they did not see a massive number of Biden-only ballots. Again, in Georgia, there was 95,000 single race ballots in favor of Biden. But in Wyoming, there were only 725 more votes for Biden than the Democratic Senate candidate. And that's how you can check it. Okay? In Georgia, there were way more votes for Biden. There were 95,000 more votes for Biden than there were for the Senate candidate, because the people that filled out those single race ballots didn't even vote in the other elections. That's not necessarily true mathematically, because the Senate guys are going to get roughly half the votes if you vote down the thing. And in the single race ballots, it's only going to Biden. So that's not completely accurate what I said. So anyway, let's keep going here. But so Wyoming, you got 725 more votes for Biden than the Democratic Senate candidate. Well, no, actually that would be true. Yeah, no, in Georgia, I'm sure Biden got 90,000 or so, at least more votes than the Senate candidate, the Democratic Senate candidate, because they would have gotten roughly the same amount before, and then there's 95,000 extra Biden votes in there. Okay, it's not exactly 95,000, of course, because everything's a little off from perfect 50-50, but there you go. Okay, now, so did it happen in any other states? Yeah, it did. You start looking at this and it really makes you wonder, because you got all these swing states, and in Pennsylvania, there are 98,000 Biden-only ballots. Georgia, there's 95, we said that already. Arizona, 42,000, Michigan, 115,000, Wisconsin, 62,000. And these were states in which Trump, on average, got fewer than 1,000 Trump-only ballots. So we're talking 99% of those swing state, single race ballots, all the swing states went to, I don't know, it doesn't have North Carolina on here. I shouldn't say things like that. But in this little group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Biden got more than 99% of the single race ballot votes. Okay. We didn't see it in non-swing state single race ballots. They were about the same, just like Wyoming. Okay. Now here's another thing that's a little weird. It's not related to the single race ballots, but I heard this on CNN too, so I know it's right, because they wouldn't say something that was helpful to the right, I don't think, unless it was absolutely true. So in Pennsylvania, evidently they take photographs of the ballots. But in Pennsylvania, they've already started erasing the photographs. So it makes going back and checking what was done very difficult. The photo evidence is being erased, or has been already. Not sure how much of it they erased before they were told not to erase it anymore. But anyway, there you go. They were erasing the photo evidence of all what the ballots looked like when they were given to one candidate or the other. Okay. Again, here's a video down here. There's a voting official in Michigan. They found a glitch where they keep saying 6,000. So I don't know whether 3,000 Trump votes were given to Biden or 6,000 Trump votes were given to Biden. And she said in this video that there were 47 other counties using the same software, and that's just in Michigan. That means they were switching votes in the other counties. It just means they use the same software. I think it's called Dominion, not Old Dominion. Anyway, that's Michigan. So there's the video if you want to look at it. And also there's an NBC News nightly report, because this has been known for a long time that these machines are funky. You know, they're strange because they're connected to the internet, for example. And if something's connected to the internet, somebody in the next room here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia could change the votes in Michigan, right? I'm no computer expert by a long shot, but I went to school with a lot of people that are, and I'm telling you, if something's connected to them and they have a cell phone or a landline, they can get all inside of that thing. I don't know how they do it, but they can do it. I was more of a theoretical physicist guy, but these computer jocks are scary. They're so good at this stuff. It's like Kevin Mitnick, the judge, when they sentenced him years and years ago, they said, nothing's more dangerous than a cell phone in your hands, because he was able to get into bank accounts with a cell phone. Okay. Or was it anyway, there's people that know so much about how these things are put together. I mean, imagine Edward Snowden, sitting at a computer terminal, and he can go into the, and he can go into the terminal. I mean, he's sitting at a computer terminal and he can get into a voting machine in Michigan. What could Edward Snowden do with that? Okay. He's kind of the modern day Kevin Mitnick, but Kevin committed some crimes. And as far as I know, Edward didn't. And I'll leave it at that for now. Amazing person. Okay. Quickie here. Supposedly there was a 90% turnout in the entire state of Wisconsin. I think that's verified, something awfully close to it. That would be the highest turnout in American history. And it also comes close to the 92% that you get in Australia, and voting is mandatory in Australia. You get fined if you don't vote. So it's a little hard to believe, but it could happen. Again, these are just things, you know, that just defy the odds a little bit. This is a soft one. I mean, you know, maybe this is such a heated election this year. A lot of people turned out, but it's an awful lot. In Milwaukee, the turnout was 84%, which is off the charts. Usually in some inner cities, the turnout's very low. Normally the overall turnout's around 60%, I think. And there've been times when it's been lower than that. And of course, years and years ago, it was higher than that. So, you know, this is kind of a soft thing, but if you want to compare it to Cleveland this year, because they're similar in demographics, they're both cold, they have the same kind of weather, they're in the Rust Belt, you know, very similar cities, only 51% turned out in Cleveland this year. Okay, this is the last slide, second to last, I think. There's a lady named Sidney Powell. She's a lawyer, and she came on Maria Bartiromo's show. It's called Sunday Morning Futures. And she claimed to already have proof through sworn statements that the Dominion machines had a program that allowed patches of software to be added to the program. And a patch of software is just a little bit of code. It could be on a thumb drive. You can send it in through the internet. That can shift votes in real time. And Mrs. Powell said that it was actually done to make sure Biden won. Now that's a very, very, very strong claim. And she says that she has the proof. So we're going to have to see. But I'll tell you, all this unlikely things and all these strange Bellwether County and all these kind of bizarre Bellwether County results and bizarre House performance versus presidential performance are tiny compared to this if it's true. I don't know what they're going to do if this is true. I'm telling you, they're going to have to, they might have to do the election over again. It's the kind of thing they can do in one day if they have to, but I'll tell you, they're going to have to do something about it. So whoever the powers that be are going to have to make a really good decision here and tell the people we're going to have to do this over again, because according to Mrs. Powell, these things can drop and drag votes. These patches that the Dominion software is vulnerable to, they can make signatures unrecognizable, so the votes get thrown out. She said that they inserted hundreds of thousands of votes multiple times that awarded Biden 67% and Trump 23% in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Now, these are direct quotes. I had to back that videotape up 10 times to get all these quotes. But boy, think about that. Hundreds of thousands of votes multiple times. And she said, we've identified the algorithm they used, I think she said. But she said there's whistleblowers that are going to testify that money was kicked back to family members of state officials for choosing Dominion over something else. And that this has been known for a long time. She's got letters written by Senators Klobuchar and Warren, both Democrats, that have complained about these horrible voting machines. And here's another thing I learned, which really blew me away, because I did not know this. Remember how I started the talk about Dr. A and his team, Benny and the other gentleman? They disclose in their video where they do the analysis that I really wasn't comfortable using, and I explained why. They said that there's times when you can say this candidate got 12.73 votes and this candidate got 21.45 votes. In other words, there's weights placed on the vote you cast. Isn't that bizarre? I'd never heard that before. Some people's votes count more than others. They swear by it. And Benny, who's the really amazing guy, that he says in the video, he never even went to college. He's just a high school graduate. Man, he's a top guy, data scientist guy. And he said that he was involved in some of the other elections in the past. And that's when they discovered that all these strange things were going on and that votes were weighted. You know, I'm always really impressed by someone. I was lucky to get a good education, but these guys like Benny and maybe Edward Snowden, I don't even think he went to college. I'm not sure, but these guys are so smart they don't need college maybe. But he talked about the past elections where votes were weighted and totals weren't whole numbers. Really strange, very upsetting too. Golly, is that going on in the United States of America? So there you have it. It was really amazing to look at all this data. I appreciate you listening to me, and I hope you found it interesting. And again, I don't know why there were so many strange results this year. Of course, I can think of lots of reasons why there were. But since I don't have proof of it, I don't even want to say it. I just want to present these very unusual things that I'm certain happened, like a Bellwether County being right 16 out of 17 times and then missing it this year times 10 or 15 or whatever. Very unusual. I mean, if you multiply the odds out on something like that, it is tiny that many could miss it after getting 15 right in a row. You know what I mean? It's just so unlikely. Okay. And I made the analogy with the card counting and the shuffling of the deck. And I tell you, it's very similar to this. And again, we don't know until Mrs. Powell, Sidney Powell, presents her evidence in a court of law, I think, and proves it one way or the other. And there's going to be a big fight over this. And if she's proven correct, if she proves herself correct with her evidence, we have got to do something about this. There is going to be a huge backlash if they don't make the correct decision on this. So again, thank you very much for watching. I started a channel on Patreon that's going to be called Truth in Science. And it's going to, again, I'm a surgeon, so I can discuss COVID very well and very interesting. A lot of mistakes were made on that too. I've sort of taken that under my wing for almost the whole time it's been around and made some predictions early on that came true when all of the experts had it wrong. So a very brilliant guy named Ivor Cummins, very knowledgeable, interviewed me over 4 days about a week ago. And when he finishes editing that, that'll be on the internet somewhere. And we covered everything, all the mathematics, the medicine. I even gave a primer on immunology. It's been 36 years, but I remember a lot of it. So it'll be real interesting to watch. And Ivor and I are very similar in the way we look at the mathematics, because he's an engineer. He's a biomedical engineer. And we look at it very mathematically about lockdowns, masks. We went over everything. And I think you'll find that interesting too. So if you can find me on Patreon sometime and become a patron or make a comment or something, I'd really appreciate it. And if you want me to do a thing on card counting, just say so in the comments and I'll be glad to do that. It's very interesting too, as you probably gathered from tonight. So thank you again, and see you down the road.